I'm back for more bitchin'. After more time, see also malding, I've come to some more concrete conclusions and wanted another go. I've unlisted the old video, but here's a link if you want to watch it for some reason. Also, a spoiler warning for Elden Ring and its DLC, I guess? Content warning for ranting and raving. But also see Elden Ring's ESRB rating. Have a good one. For a video that's gonna be pretty overwhelmingly negative, I do want to start off by saying that I think Fromsoft games have a method of storytelling that's unique and good. As someone who loves Kingdom Hearts though, I'll allow that good can be subjective. So to explain what I mean, let's compare RPG contemporaries from when I was becoming interested in video games as a medium for storytelling. Skyrim and the original Dark Souls both released in 2011. They both have linear stories in a fantasy world that mostly revolve around you going from point A to point B, e.g. the Dragonborn acquiring shouts to defeat Alduin, and the chosen undead getting Lord Souls in a Lord Vessel to kindle the first flame. With Skyrim, the illusion of freedom is sometimes dangled before the player, but fairly often quests only have one manner of completion, and the choice is whether or not you can tolerate it being uncompleted in your quest log. You have to fight Alduin, you have to become Archmage, or Guild Leader, or Harbinger, or Listener, to get to the next stage of that faction's quest. While you don't have to interact with those factions, that's where a majority of the content lies. There's little consequence for joining one faction versus another, too. You can be an assassin for the Dark Brotherhood and a honorable companion. You can be the Thane of every single hold, including ones of opposing sides in the Civil War. The original Dark Souls dragged me into its world and story a bit more, I think, because it's the player's choice to engage to an extent. Yes, you are told what to do and how to progress the game. You need to ring both Bells of Awakening and get the Lord Vessel and the Lord Souls, but, for example, you can find out that Guinevere is an illusion. This illusion is created by the last god of Anor Londo, Gwyndolin, as means to convince or compel the chosen undead to sacrifice themselves, and keep the Age of Fire, the Age of the Gods, going. You can choose to destroy this illusion. You can choose to listen to Kaith instead of Frampt. And you can ultimately choose whether or not you walk away from the first flame. This isn't to say that one is better than the other necessarily, nor that there aren't issues with the more Dark Souls style of things. The more arcane and obtuse method of conveying a story makes it easy to miss key pieces. Like, if you don't talk to an NPC or read something seemingly random, a whole important plot point can be overlooked. Being less on the nose about certain things can also lead people to taking what characters say at face value, and at times it can be hard to know if some things are intentional or just an artifact of game development, where cut content gets left in on accident. I've heard a non-insignificant number of Souls fans state outright that they ignore the story or don't know that there is one. If you're anything like me, scrolling through the comments on a Fextra Life page will make you start taking poison damage in real life. So, around Dark Souls 3, the weaknesses were becoming more apparent. Perhaps most notably was the last-minute switch of the names of the characters St. Aldrich and Pontiff Sullivan, two key antagonists of the game. This switch is no small thing either, because it reinterprets both the roles and actions, especially related to Henri. And Henri is a key NPC for one of the game's endings, for whom Aldrich particularly plays a pivotal role in the story of. A major change like that, relatively late in the game's development, says something about that development, not something necessarily good. It felt indicative of a writing process becoming decoupled from the rest of the game. And ultimately, after rehashing a similar formula of tragedy, fallen gods and heroes, lost hopes, for the third game in a row, I, and perhaps some at Fromsoft, were ready to put Dark Souls to bed once and for all. And for its flaws, Dark Souls 3 managed to end on a satisfying enough note, the most hopeful ending choice of which, in my opinion, is the one where you let Dark Souls end finally. With all that said, though, news about Elden Ring's development and the partnership with George R.R. Martin for the game's writing had me intrigued. A Song of Ice and Fire thematically revolves around the nature of power. Power in interpersonal and familial relationships, between leaders and their people, and different groups, in its case, kingdoms and nations. This felt perfectly fitting as several FromSoft games have touched upon similar themes, but sometimes lacked on the interpersonal or world dynamics, or they did so in ways that made them impenetrable to many players. Elden Ring succeeded in some ways while failing in others, but I found myself deeply invested in Marika and the demigods, and the world of the lands between. It really did feel like an ancient land with lots of history, and a very deep sense of how that history contributed to the current world state. This is not to say that the past games lacked these qualities necessarily, I just think that Elden Ring did it best. Like, I love Bloodborne, woohoo, go Bloodborne, but Yharnam is a rather self-contained city. Its placement in space and time is rather vague beyond its aesthetics and industrialization. The influence of its history and the goings-on of the outside world are lost over the rapid expansion and then destruction brought about by the Blood and the Beast Plague, and probably also due to cosmic shenanigans. This both feeds into the atmosphere while also making it feel kind of unmoored. The Thumerians are interesting from a lore perspective, but the Chalice dungeons that hold them are completely optional. There's very little of their influence on Yharnam's architecture or culture that the average player would encounter. Even where their lore does tie into the game's narrative proper, you can still perfectly understand the plot regarding Lawrence trying to fast-pass Eldritch knowledge and starting a plague about it, without ever necessarily needing to know a lot about the Thumerians besides that they existed. By comparison, the Nox and Elden Ring are another lost civilization, similarly buried underground. You could technically bypass them as they're in optional locations for the most part, but you're not likely to, because they can be encountered in the underground areas, and those have several access points. 2 of the major ending-related quests will bring you in direct contact with the Nox because you have to go underground for them as well. Beyond the world building, however, there's also ways in which characters' personal motivations are more complex in Elden Ring than in past titles, and also more ways that impacts the plot. Artorias is cool, and there's something there in the fact he failed at stopping the Abyss, but he's mostly just a noble knight. He stands out more so because a lot of bosses in Dark Souls 1 are very impersonal big demons. Whereas in Elden Ring, Morgott defends the Erdtree that disdains him for being an omen, even when it'd be much easier to simply let you find out that the Erdtree is blocked by thorns, because he sees you and his bitch-ass siblings as pillagers and unworthy. He's not defending it because he thinks he's the only thing stopping you from getting in, he's beating your ass because he thinks you will profane the sacred. He mixes cursed blood attacks alongside holy projections in his second phase, something that ties him into Moog despite his adherence to the Golden Order too. Morgott's a fun fight, but he's made really memorable by everything surrounding him and his complexity. All this is to say, though, that characters and world building are tools best used in tandem. A world is only as interesting as the people in it. Characters lose interiority when the world they live in is shallow. While Artorias may not be capital C complex, his station as one of Gwyn's most elite knights and his corruption by the Abyss inform the player of 2 things. That the world was already flawed before the fire faded, and that Artorias' myth was false. This sort of subversion of the base game's previous lore is believable as a history rewriting the gods of Anor Londo would do, because the idea that one of them, one of their best, could not only fail but be corrupted. Not only was this anathema to the world they created, but it would also be a very dangerous idea for their human subjects. I think the strength where level and character design, NPCs, dialogue, world building are leveraged to create a narrative, and this method was elevated in Elden Ring, but that it faltered in the DLC. Now, while I am tempted to launch into the DLC's weaknesses immediately, I think it's important to contextualize why I think the base game worked where the DLC doesn't. Elden Ring's base game revolves around Queen Marika the Eternal, god of the Golden Order and vessel of the Elden Ring. Marika killed the other gods of the lands between, sowed a bounty with their blood, and sealed away death itself, all so that no one could oppose her. Her children, who went on to inherit fragments of her power after she smashed the Elden Ring with a hammer, used their newfound strength to mostly try and kill one another. These wars, known as the Shattering, resulted in a lands between that is but a shadow of its former self, scattered with ruins and mindless soldiers still fighting wars for leaders who themselves have long gone mad, or more mad, given up, or were mad to begin with. I think the most illustrative of Elden Ring's themes, and likely intended first demigod you face for this reason, is Godric. Godric the Grafted is a grotesque amalgam of limbs stolen by a man vainly trying to reclaim a glory he feels is owed to him via birthright. He's a teaser for the worst traits of the demigods, a coward who seems to have lost every fight he's ever started. He surrendered immediately to Malenia and had to beg for his life, and he may have picked a fight with the Redmanes after Radahn got zombified, and he still lost. And, the part where he sticks corpses onto himself while bragging about his superiority. He sucks, and it's great. He and the surrounding faction in the Limgrave starting area gives the player a strong sense of the corruption that led to the world being the way it is. But Godric is not the only demigod, nor is he the only one who failed to achieve anything during the Shattering. The specific means by which the other demigods all failed is important too, and a focal point of their demises. The big fight that encaps the opening cutscene between Malenia and Radahn ends in a total loss on both sides. Malenia because she exploded and lost her brother, and Radahn because he's literally a zombie now. Meanwhile, after his soldiers abandon him on account of his going nuts and feeding himself to a snake, Rykard establishes the Volcano Manor. Rykard already wasn't a great dude, with his faction built over top a torture monument prison town, but now at the heart of which he consumes champions, tricked by promises of strength and glory, all to add to his own. And finally, there's Mohg. Mohg fills his mausoleum, the seat of his hopeful dynasty, with blood, tortured and mutated prisoners and cultists, and more blood. His most faithful follower, Vare, has his quest end with his pleas for Mohg's love and promises of strength to be fulfilled, left unheard, and Vare is left to die. And Mohg uselessly beseeches Miquella, all the same. While I think these story elements are strong and unified, there is something to be said about the nature of the ending you're actually building up to, and how that information is actually conveyed. There is an inherent contradiction laid within. The endings give no detail of your rule or the outcome of your choices, really, besides what color the Erdtree is. Does everyone stop being zombies? Is Marika, dead, or at least dead in the way that a jar is? What exactly happens after the ring gets mended? The lands between have been low-key destroyed. What does rebuilding even look like? What happens if you don't kill all the demigods? Do they oppose your rule? Well, as much as a zombie or someone like Godric can meaningfully oppose your rule, I guess. And there are two exceptions to the Elden Lord endings. One, the Age of Stars, is where you marry Ranni. Ranni Thanos snaps Marika such that godhood is no longer a factor in the lives of those of the lands between. It's ambiguous and a little foreboding, and yet hopeful in the sense that no one will have the sort of power that Marika did. The other ending is in which the Lord of Frenzied Flame burns the whole world down, ending all life. The Frenzied Flame ending, I suppose, answers all the potential questions brought up in other endings with a big fat, everyone is dead so it doesn't matter, whereas the Age of Stars, by being even more ambiguous, gives a vague hope. All this kind of points back to the somewhat overall hands-offedness to the player's motivations and the results of such. It's not up to your motives. You are told to do certain things, like how leaving any demigod alive by the end of the game is probably a bad idea, but there's not a mechanical consequence for it. It might have been interesting if the Elden Beast or Radagon parts of the final fight were changed such that every not dead demigod would have made the fight harder. But as it stands, the main draw of killing all the demigods is for more boss fights, or if you want Gideon to use all the spells in the game. I did not necessarily expect the DLC to give us insight into the post-game world. I did, however, hope that a DLC would come back in to fill in some of the details, and or to answer some questions. While the demigods are focal points of the game, there is still a lot unanswered about them, like with characters such as Godwin, whose role in the story is mostly just cool guy who died badly, slightly out of place maybe among his shittier siblings, although there is obviously both something interesting in his peacemaking with the dragons, and his current condition as the Prince of Death. There was also an opportunity to expound upon other things hinted at in the base game, but not extrapolated on. Rodan's portrait at Rykard's Manor and the abductor virgins all over Caelid hint at some kind of relationship between the two, for example. Or maybe something about Renala and the Academy, who she was before she was queen and what led up to her marrying Radagon. Or Morgott and his blood-flame sword. His lack of mention of Moog during his bitch out at his siblings monologue indicates some kind of something between the two. Or, yes, it also could involve Marika's past and anything about the dragons, or the Beastmen, or the Glomide Queen. FromSoft DLCs tend towards acting as their game's pinnacle. There's a refinement of story and gameplay elements. Scholar of the First Sin is widely regarded as the true Dark Souls 2, bringing loads of gameplay stuff in while also refocusing on the nature of rulers and the interplay of light and dark and what could lie outside that dichotomy. The Old Hunters of Bloodborne fills in so much information about the Church, Lady Maria, Ludwig, and Cause, while providing challenging and memorable fights. Artorias of the Abyss not only gave us a peek into the pre-fire fading world of Dark Souls 1, whilst also showing how Gwyn's Age of Fire was already rotting from within long before he set himself ablaze, it also introduced gameplay elements that set the template for the series to come with bosses like Artorias and Manus. I, like many people, waited with bated breath for the expected DLC announcement. I went hog wild when it happened and rushed to pre-order it, something I almost never do even with the original Elden Ring. I troubleshooted my download issues with it for hours on a work night because I was so damn excited. It was designed in a lab to piss me off specifically. The DLC starts off with an interesting premise. Who was Marika before godhood? What kind of world did she inhabit that led her to being like that? However, what spins out from this is a story weaker than the base games and one that actively subtracts from it. It also fails on its own merits, to which we'll begin with its core, Messmer's Crusade, and the Hornsent. The principal story of the DLC is of Marika Uno reversing the Hornsent so hard that they were flung into another dimension. Kinda, maybe. Whatever, she did something to them so hard that they are conveniently remembered by no one at all in the base game. There's no references left to their culture or their works or anything. And then long after that, when her own empire would go on to commit similar atrocities like enslaving trolls or murdering baby Omen, she had the Hornsent murdered en masse by her cursed son. And for all that, we have 2 Hornsent NPCs that we can actually converse with, the others all being enemies or dead. Besides the unnamed man Hornsent, by the way, is the also unnamed Grand Aeom, who will only talk to us if we wear the pilfered corpse of her god. Just to start off with, the base game did this kind of idea better twice. The Nox are another culture/kingdom that were up to some shit vaguely in the past, got their salad tossed and banished underground by the Greater Will, but you can find evidence of their presence and history everywhere, and there's an indication that after their banishment they were still trying to achieve their goals, and their cultural impact is significant. Their connection to the Carians, to Celia, the Black Knife Assassins, Estelle, there's a lot. It's not all easy to find and requires some hunting around for, but it is there. Another historical culture that's been removed from the lands between proper is Farum Azula, which Placidusax yoinked into a storm beyond time, but we can see literal fragments of it strewn across the lands between, even potentially where it was once connected to the mainland with the Bestial Sanctum. There's even a couple of beastmen in the lands between still, though few and far between. So the Hornsent have been banished similarly for as long or longer than the Nox, and there's nothing except supposedly the Omen curse. Okay, well, let's take a look at the writing of the Hornsents themselves. Maybe that's interesting. Oh no, that's bad too. Messmer and company are given far more sympathy and complexity than the Hornsent that they genocided, and this failure is centered upon the main Hornsent character you spend the most time with, inconveniently also named Hornsent. Now, Hornsent the NPC is not completely without sympathetic elements, however he, his wife, and child are all unnamed. Writing stuff time, if you have a character you want the audience to sympathize with, you need to humanize them. Rendering them literally faceless, nameless, and defined largely by their cruelty, both narratively the Hornsent versus those they oppressed, and Hornsent the NPC trying to kill you regardless if you help him, or rather even if you do, serves to create a barrier from an audience's sympathy. Now, it is up to Shadow of the Erdtree's audience to see the Hornsent's genocide is unjust, because it was. There's a reason you spend so much of the DLC walking through mass graves and burned out towns, but for comparison, Messmer has a face, and, a name. So do several of his loyal Fire Knights. Salza and Hilda wish for the specimens in the storehouse to be preserved, which apparently caused a rift. Hilda is dead, and Salza is just sent to go guard a bridge, maybe? And Wigo, Salza's mentor, is described as lonely, seeking religiosity in Messmer's flame. Cood, or Code, their captain, is adorned in Messmer's beloved winged serpents. He is the last enemy in your way before Messmer's sulking tower. In general, the Fire Knights are defined by their deep loyalty to Messmer, former stations as Erdtree upperclass shunned for said allegiance, and even the unnamed soldiers are given nuance, hopes, and fears. Messmer commits a secret genocide on his mother's behalf, knowing it will bring him neither honor nor glory, and he's cursed, and Marika fears him for it. The loyalty of his soldiers is not assured, and some of his best still tried to kill him due to his cursed nature. Messmer mourns the loss of a brother in arms in traitorous Hugh, and he inters Hugh and his father's Andreas's bodies despite this betrayal. Of course, the violence is not just applied to the Hornsent, as a fort of reprimand demonstrates how many of Messmer's soldiers were also from penal units, and whose service was rendered at least partly through torture and murder. So, Messmer's not just a poor little scrimblow, at least. But the game layers the pity on pretty thick. Marika willingly abandoned him, and he knows this. That's why he sits in the dark with the sole unbeheaded statue of his mother in the entire realm of Shadow, one that's holding a baby. In a desperate bid, he destroys the last artifact of his mother's that kept his curse in check. He willingly allows himself to take on the mantle of Marika's monstrous deeds, and she still abandoned him. He dies cursing her after longing only for her love. He is framed essentially as being doomed from the start. For comparison, what do we know about the NPC Hornsent? He's driven blind by revenge, and his hatred of those who slaughtered his beloved people clouds out his love for them. Most notably, I think, in his questline is that if he fails to achieve his vengeance, he turns to Miquella seeking redemption. He and I would take note of the caterpillar mask that he wears, and the description of that states that said mask is a ritual implement of the greater potentates of Bonnie Village. E.g. that Hornsent is one of the people that stuffed criminals and the shaman into jars. He is directly linked to the violence and oppression of the shaman and other peoples. Therefore, joining Miquella is a form of penance, I believe we're to presume, or perhaps that Hornsent just feels remorse for being really uncool. I think there's also a crucial difference between the violence of Messmer's crusade versus the Hornsent's jar ritual. This isn't to say that the game hides or undersells the sheer violence and bloodshed of the crusade. The fields and fields of spirit graves, so numerous that if they were physical objects, 80% of the map would be impassable, alongside with previously mentioned burned out towns and villages, are all meant as a testament of the depravity of what happened. It also stands a bit in contrast to the base game, which outside Leyndell is kinda bereft of normal living settlements. So it's not to say that the DLC fails to show that Messmer's crusade was bad, it's that there's a level of separation via the fact that your positive interactions with the Hornsent are much more limited, whereas the game is telling you about all the layers of Messmer's genocide gang. Meanwhile, the Hornsent are a very homogenous group that love the tower and the spiral and the dancing lion, and that's about as much as you get in terms of their society and culture, except the jar body horror ritual, plunging people into eternal darkness, and a fixation with putting big sheets on things. The jar ritual also just does something different and more visceral, I think. With multiple locations where a player can encounter them, it's pretty much impossible to ignore. There's a creeping buildup when you enter the first jail, with spirits terrified of the ritual long after their death. The jails are bitterly cold-feeling locations, full of torture instruments and corpses and cages and jars, which the player's previous familiarity with characters like Alexander and Jar Baron is subverted by deep unease. And the innards that crawl out are just about the most unsettling thing in the whole DLC, but they're also kinda deeply pathetic. They're awkward and blobby, their tender pink flesh just stands in stark contrast to the freezing blues of their surroundings. I think the vividness of the horror of the jar innards creates very intense emotions for the player, whereas the shadowified enemies of the Hornsent are much less emotion-grabbing. Like, I can imagine how it would feel to be a jar innard, but I don't know what's going on with being shadowified. And ultimately, the alternative to Hornsent questline, if you fulfill his desire for revenge, it just poisons him, and he seeks to double Uno reverse genocide the Erdtree's kin, ending in a fight with the Tarnished where he just dies. I think Hornsent and Marika are possibly meant to act as foils. Hornsent is a father who lost his family, and Marika is a mother who lost hers. They both have a deep well of pain that stems from losing the people they loved, and neither of them was able to see the whole of the greater injustice and end the violence with their own actions, though I suppose Hornsent kind of tries by joining Miquella, if he does. And Hornsent's got a few moments of humanity where his questline and the Grand Ams intersect, but he willfully turns away from this last living connection to his people and culture, in pursuit of violence, as Marika abandons the shaman village and allows what happened to her people to fade from memory entirely. But where Marika has received a well of sympathy from a fandom that widely characterized her as a conniving bitch and little else prior to the DLC, they now call her crusade so terrible it couldn't be mentioned at all despite all the other terrible things she did, justified. Hornsent, meanwhile, is treated as a rotten bastard and is hated, and the Hornsent are widely blamed for their own genocide. While this reaction is partly just an artifact of edgy gamers being total jackasses and using video game bigotry as a fig leaf, it's also because crucially the order of events is turned around. Marika is raised in cruelty, witnesses the torture and annihilation of her people, and then goes on to recreate it. Hornsent was a participant in it, then bore witness to mass slaughter. If Hornsent was not a potentate, or even had been a critic of the jar horror ritual before Messmer's crusade, wouldn't his anger have been all that more bitter, all that harder for players to try and ignore, that he and his family were innocent but punished anyway? Instead, he kinda just sucks from beginning to end, and he shit his pants. Now, I will say that Elden Ring's base game does have some issues regarding a lack of complexity out of its oppressed non-human peoples. Like, there's no misbegotten you can speak to, and they're always hostile to you. And there's no named misbegotten characters either in-game or in lore, but they are given agency in the sense that many rebel against their oppressors, like in Castle Morn, or seek freedom under the Erdtree and fight in its defense. I think there was an opportunity missed to have a named misbegotten NPC to get their perspective on things. Having a named character also gives depth because they can talk about things besides their oppression. Bach's storyline, for example, has little to do with the other demi-humans that abandon him after he gets his sewing stuff back, though it's still related to the demi-human subjugation. Bach feels that he's ugly, and if you send him to Renala to be reborn, he'll be reborn as a human, but like her other reborn children will be frail and die. It is only through the vice of his mother that he cements his own self-worth and doesn't go down a self-destructive path. That said, however, the demihumans overall suffer similarly to the misbegotten in that they are often treated as generic enemies. They do learn magic, which is interesting, and also shows that they're not stupid, but it is noteworthy how Bach, the only good demihuman, is polite, or rather submissive, and eloquent and desperate to be loved. He is separated from his kin both by speaking to the player, where no other demihuman does, they only screech, scream, or roar, and also being in a servile role to them, and wearing more proper clothes where the other demihumans wear rags. There's something at the very least uncomfortable kinda going on there. Wouldn't it be interesting if there was a demihuman queen you could talk to? What if she taught spells like Selen did? Even if she didn't give you a huge lore dump about their culture and religion, choices of her dialogue, like her style of speech or how friendly she is, would inform you about her and her position among her people. It would just be something to make them less generic enemies. We do, however, get a divergence from this pattern with the Omen. The normal Omen encountered by the player are chained, often have their horns cut off, leaving large, painful wounds. They have nightmares about their tormentors, and there's also the chilling element of the fact that the Omen you fight are the lucky ones, not murdered as babies, if you can call being disfigured or trapped underground lucky. While they still overwhelmingly occupy a role of generic enemy, I think with the Omen there's an even deeper sense that their mistreatment is incredibly cruel, as there's so much focus on their pain. They also differ from the misbegotten or demihumans in that there are two major characters that are Omen. Morgott and Mohg are the twin Omen children of Marika and Godfrey. Even Marika was not spared of the Crucible's curse, and despite being divinity herself, she could or would not spare her children, so into the sewer they went. Where Morgott grew to be desperate for their Erdtree's love and ashamed of his omenness, Mohg instead found someone, or perhaps rather something, that loved him in the Formless Mother. Mohg embraces his Omen blood, gets it set on fire by the Formless Mother, and allows one of his Omen horns to blind him. Some visual language to layer on the metaphor. He starts a cult that tortures and kidnaps people, otherwise luring those in under false promises of love, ultimately replacing the austere and thinly veiled evil of the Golden Order with outright violence and terror. With visions of grandeur, Mohg kidnaps Miquella so as to establish a new dynasty as a god's consort. He rips Miquella out of his cocoon and makes blood offerings to awaken him, but in ripping it open, Mohg has trapped Miquella in a suspended animation without end. Miquella, trapped as he is, can never give Mohg what he wants, and he probably wouldn't want to anyways. Mohg, not unlike Vare, fruitlessly beseeches someone who does not hear him and does not love him. Mohg serves as something of a culmination of the demigod's worst traits. He's ambitious and hungry for power and willing to do anything necessary to gain it. The violent imagery of Miquella being ripped from a womb, and the uncomfortable nature of not only being Mohg's half-brother, but also cursed with a child's body, add layers to the depravity. But it is also worth remembering that Mohg is partly the way he is because he, like Morgott, was deprived of love and compassion by their mother, in the world they were born into that thought it was justifiable to murder, enslave, and disfigure Omen. He has seen a flaw in the world and wants to establish his own dynasty in place of it. He is also an evil maniac that does so not out of a desire for justice, but for power. But it's not that he was born evil, that's what made him a compelling villain. Hornsent, meanwhile, the guy that is, doesn't have a clear foil like Morgott and Mohg do. The Grand Dam can be incredibly kind and loving, but again, only if you're wearing the dancing lion's head. But I suppose you can make the argument that I'm comparing apples to oranges. The Omen and Misbegotten function differently in the narrative than the Hornsent do. To which I'd again offer that the base game did this idea better already with the Albinaurics and Latena. The Albinaurics are artificially created and unjustly hated due to their separation from the Erdtree. Their artificiality results in bodies either fated to lose their legs and perish, or bodies that are frog-like and ridiculed. Both face violence, however only the more humanoid Albinaurics get a speaking named NPC. They actually get two. Though I think the second generation Albinaurics do get their complexity in other ways. The ones faithful to Miquella use Discus of Light, whereas the ones lured to Moog's cult are stained red with his blood, and also are notably in pain when using their blood spike attacks. But back to the NPCs. The two speaking Albinauric NPCs, Albus and Latena, give you an insight about their deal. Albus mostly serves to give you, or have taken from him, the rolled medallion half, and get you started on the path to the consecrated snowfield. And he does explain the whole legs fading and dying thing. Latena, meanwhile, is at first outright hostile to you, because you are human and her people and companion mount mobility aid just got slaughtered, needlessly, by humans. But she chooses to hear you out when you show her the secret medallion, and you can take her with you to the consecrated snowfield. Latena is unique as an NPC, as she also is a spirit summon, and she can speak and also ride the Albinauric wolves, which is pretty cool. You can also have the ability to bring her a certain amount of hope and peace by bringing her to Philia, notably named despite showing up for like 2 seconds, and allowing her to fulfill her mission. I think in this way, Hornsent is almost like the anti-Latena. He's hostile to you and never gives up his grudge. His people were also slaughtered, but it's kinda his fault. I don't believe this, but the game kinda edges very close to saying this regarding him joining Miquella for redemption. You can help Hornsent fulfill his mission, but he tries to kill you anyway. And also fulfilling his mission is kinda pointless because the Hornsent are still annihilated, and killing Messmer only puts you on a path to kill Miquella, not bring a promise of real, if only imagined, change. Whereas Latena's questline results in a future for the Albinaurics possibly untied to their artificial creation. One where they can make lives for themselves and not be at the behest of cruel masters. It should be understood, as it was with Latena, that Hornsent has a very good reason to hate you outright, but this almost comical level to which he hates you even after you help him contributes to the image that Hornsent and his people are evil. He doesn't even talk to you during his post-Messmer invasion. I want to be clear that I don't think the DLC is attempting to do genocide apologia. The destruction of the Hornsent wouldn't be framed as so sad if it was. Your first entry into the DLC is a field of mass graves. But this lack of complexity within the Hornsent is a huge error. The DLC is attempting some moral complexity, but it's tripping in the shallow end. Thematically, there's the goal of demonstrating how the Hornsent's dogmatism and cruelty led to their downfall, and how America failed to stop similar suffering from occurring. She may have originally sought to build a kinder world than the one she was born into, but she couldn't see past her pain and rage. But the Hornsent are a paper cutout where America is not. It also ends up feeling rather trite. Instead of the hornless people, it became the horned. Ooh! Such biting commentary of a thing that rarely, if ever, has happened.
Of all of the things in the world that have never happened, that has never happened the most. That is the most didn't happen shit of all time. What a bunch of baloney. Actual horseradish.
Where I think the base game's treatment of its oppressed peoples could have been done better, overall it was adequately portrayed such that players could understand it as wrong. Non-humans are enslaved and treated like shit because they are viewed as inferior to the Erdtree and the Golden Order as a means to justify their exploitation and violence against them. In the DLC, oppressed and oppressor trade places because no one learns any lessons or thinks about things. It's just asinine. There's also the strange artifact that the shaman's oppression is technically justified in-universe. Their flesh is the best at melding things together, the exact purpose for which the jar ritual serves. The Hornsent were trying to make a god with their cruelty, and they got one. It just also blew up in their face. Wouldn't it perhaps said something more if the whole shaman best for meat crimes thing was false? I also think the reframing of the DLC makes America and her Golden Order's practices on the non-humans worse, given the timeline. America waited a long time to start that genocide, long after the Hornsent had been EBDB'd so hard that everyone forgot about them. America bore first-hand witness to the worst the Hornsent had to offer, and then just made it again in her own utopian version of society she built. Like, girl, you were there! And maybe that's meant to be a commentary on the same sort of sickness that causes lots of people to look at injustice and decide rather than dismantling it, they'd rather be on top. Hell, Mo kinda did it in the base game, so Marika is Queen Pick-Me the Eternal. But that's not the sense I get from the DLC, and again, if fan reactions are anything to go by, then that's not what audiences have received either. And here's the other thing. Most of the time when targets of oppression work the system to reward them, there's not like a moment where they do a coup and rewrite unjust laws. They just grift and confirm all the biases of their oppressors, and when their usefulness is at its end, they get discarded. Maybe if the DLC had focused on Marika's seduction and what the hell that actually meant, we would have seen more of that element, but it's not there, and supposition is not a replacement for actual writing. Big news coming from a lore nerd, I know. And listen, I say all this with the understanding, I don't expect all my media to reflect real life. No duh. But I do also think if you're writing a story that is apparently trying to say something, and that thing is about genocide, then maybe you should think about some things. Maybe you should have one Hornsent with an actual name. Ah, fuck! Wait, I forgot about Inquisitor Jory, and Mira, and Labyrinth? Okay, we have 3. We have 3 named Hornsent in the entire DLC that I can name off the top of my head. What the fuck is Jory's lore? I don't know, something something Midra, something something madness, the Curse Blades used to be hated and then they helped fight Messmer? Yeah. I think very few people outside the most nerd-to-nerd lore nerds care about most of that. But whatever, the Hornsent are a bunch of guys that were totally off-screen on a bus, we swear. In another story, maybe this sort of thing wouldn't bother me as much, lost civilizations, blah blah blah. Fromsoft likes to play fast and loose with events anyways. Sure, Gwyn can have 10 secret children, whatever. This did actually bother me, but this video isn't about Dark Souls. I'm not saying I need times and dates, but Miquella's seeking of a path to the Land of Shadow is directly related to the Shattering, which, vaguely temporally, is likely not super ancient history because we still have NPCs who are present for it and coherent and not all wrinkly raisins. Everything about the Hornsent, however, is treated like super ancient history, or at least seems to be. There's also the strange artifact of the reality that Marika's whole apotheosis occurred before everything else, but Messmer's crusade happened much more recently by comparison. What were the Hornsent doing this whole time? When did the EBDBing happen? My assumption is that it happened right after Marika achieved godhood, since Leda says an affair from which gold arose and so too was Shadow born, in reference to Marika's ascension. So, Hornsent EBDB'd, Marika shenanigans, Messmer genocide, Miquella's well this sucks, and then the Shattering happens, right? Leda tells us in the trailer that Miquella abandoned the Erdtree and the Golden Order due to Messmer's crusade. But the whole fucking timeline is thrown out because Romino's remembrance states that she wove the Scarlet Rot back into being after the sealed god was sealed away, hence the butterflies bereft of a master, because you don't need to kill Melania for the DLC, so it's not about her, and that only happened during Messmer's crusade, because that's what burned down her church, which means that Messmer's crusade took place before Miquella and Melania were born. Okay, I'm normal now. There is more in the DLC, after all. There's R'Lana, who serves as the primary roadblock to Shadow Altus, and there's Gaius, who is also there. Unfortunately, they both piss me off. We'll start with R'Lana because you're more likely to encounter her first. For one thing, it's annoying to have yet another woman just be hopelessly attached to some guy, when I felt like R'Lana had the most capacity to be far more interesting than the game allowed her to be via similar characterization. R'Lana's fall to madness at least has the explanation of the Amber Egg, or the Marika Radagon thing, or having Ranni die, a thing that shouldn't have been possible via R'Lana's understanding of the world at the time. Yeah, maybe she would become obsessed with bringing dead kids back to life, and it's not just about Radagon. But what the hell does R'Lana find so compelling about Messmer? I was also annoyed by the fact that R'Lana's twin moon shtick kinda undermines Rennala and Ronnie's whole deal with their own moons. Rennala didn't discover the full moon by herself, guide an outer god to her, or was chosen by it for some reason. Her sister was also there off camera and actually met and then was able to incarnate 2 moons! She's just Rennala but cooler? Why'd Radagon marry Rennala then? Why was Rennala queen and not R'Lana? Rennala's full moon bewitched the Academy, but they thought 2 was tacky? Her whole plot just feels so stupid and expects you to take it so seriously. R'Lana's existence is also perplexing for other reasons, namely again related to the tautological nature of time and the order of events. The entire thing with Rennala and Radagon's story was it was only through their marriage that they ended the Carrion Wars, and that union led to the Carrion siblings' births, as well as the folding of magic into the Golden Order. So when did R'Lana join Messmer? I ask this because Messmer was apparently like an older brother to Radahn, so Messmer had to have been sent off to go murderize the Hornsent sometime after Radahn was born. So Messmer's super secret crusade took place after Marika's wars for the Erdtree. Setting aside the whole Romina thing, the game for the most part treats the order of events such that Miquella was around to see Messmer's genocide, or rather know of it since the EBD being. If I were to guess, it was around when the memory took place, because Radahn would 1. Be young enough to watch his cool half-brother Messmer go off to burninate the countryside, and 2. The memory would only be notable if it's in relation to some event regarding Miquella seeing his other redhead half-brother go off crusading. It would make sense as a moment for Miquella to be like, hey Radahn, let's make a world that sucks less, as the specific thing that spurred them to make their stupid pact. Going back to R'Lana though, so this means that R'Lana abandoned her sister after Rennala's divorce that made her go crazy, because Miquella was born via Radagon and Marika's union, after Rennala lost her mind. Okay, so R'Lana sucks too. I mean, we knew this already because she assisted in a genocide. You know, there are burned, impaled corpses right outside her castle, but just add that in too, why not? But again, that just makes me wonder why the fuck R'Lana cares so much about Messmer. She feels bad he's cursed? What about her own damn sister? Rennala is locked in her own library by her own students. What about her niece that's trying to defy godhood? Moving on, there's Gaius. God, Gaius. I am so confused and vaguely pissed off by this man, not helped by the fact I fought the 1.0 version of him. Again, going back to before, Gaius and Messmer apparently were like older brothers to Radahn. Gaius is an Albinauric, but we know from the base game that the Albinaurics and Carrions have some kind of arrangement, with Albinaurics serving Carrions, so it would make sense for the Gaius and Radahn to interact. It even might potentially make sense why Gaius would be removed from history, even if the Carrions may not have, outright enslaved or tortured the Albinaurics. That doesn't necessarily mean that their arrangement was good, per se, and if Pedia is anything to go by, it's not like they were just cool, perfectly equal friends. But the sticking point with Gaius is his whole thing with Messmer. The Albinaurics are detested by the Golden Order. Albinaurics are tortured in the prison town, in Liurnia, in Leyendell, everywhere. Everything in the base game, and Messmer's own virulent hatred of anything untouched by grace should mean that Messmer would hate Gaius, but he doesn't. Instead, they commiserate over their curses. This is something that could be interesting because it potentially implies some things about Gaius, like that he's received grace and thus could be viewed as one of the good ones by Messmer, which is a whole heap of a dynamic that might have given us insight into both their characters, but it doesn't go anywhere. It mostly serves, I think, to make Messmer slightly more nuanced, and makes Gaius just like a terrible person if you think about him for more than 2 seconds. Gaius has grace maybe, so it's okay for him to be in my army even though he's not human. I'm okay with Messmer slaughtering people like me because fuck you, got mine. But it's not as though the game states these things either visually or in text or dialogue. So it's entirely possible, given the vagueness, that Messmer just inexplicably excludes Albinaurics from his graceless and therefore needs to be murdered criteria. That's the less charitable explanation, Another might be that Messmer specifically hates people who had their grace taken from them, which doesn't make sense. But hatred isn't exactly rational. Gaius probably also didn't barge into Messmer's moping corner, so... Unlike Rolana, though, I have a question. What point does Gaius serve narrative level design-wise? Like, yeah, he's a boss, but why is he there? Like, he's completely optional, he doesn't block the way to anything except more shadow fragments, which is a gameplay function, but that's not a story function. His placement is made even more confusing because next to him is the path to the shaman village. It would have made much more sense to have Gaius actually block the way there, if nothing else to have him be demonstrated as actually being important to Messmer, entrusted with protecting this thing that Marika wanted to keep hidden, as opposed to driving around a random field that leads to a big bowl. In past FromSoft games, I usually felt like boss placement was important, especially named bosses. In the DLC, it almost feels random sometimes, like we were running out of time and had to shove someone somewhere. Something we already had issues with in the base game, but made more egregious in my eyes because I felt like FromSoft DLCs usually displayed what lessons were learned from the base game. The connections between level design and characterization is being worn thin in ways I felt in the past were mostly reserved for mini-bosses, not apparently crucial named key characters. Although I would hardly call Gaius a key character. Except key in making me mad. What also gets to me here is that neither of these people are represented grotesquely in any way. Video games are a visual medium for all the damn text in these games. FromSoft loves doing visual storytelling with stuff like this. Osiris is a gross, wet, dragon man monster thing. He at first shambles around after the player in a vaguely human way, but then he launches his invisible baby at the ground and starts scary crawling after you like a monster. Whatever is left of his proud, kingly facade is finally ripped off by his horrible inner self. Genichiro destroys his body-seeking heretical strength, disregarding his humanity in the vain hope of preserving Ashina, and thereby anything that would have made it worth saving by trying to do so on the ashen edifice of a tortured child's cursed blood. Fucking Godric! Godric as this grotesque mass of greedy hands selfishly grasping for strength by any means necessary because he feels owed it. He delights in his cruelty, he's utterly repugnant. Gaius and Rolana, though? No, they're just cool knights with Goku powers. There is no veneer to wipe off, nothing. And I do understand there is an element to which monstrousness and how it's conveyed visually can be done in ways that reinforce negative societal views of the sick and disabled. But it stops being a clever subversion, where the monster is just a guy, when it's done so constantly. It doesn't feel like Gaius and Rolana's coolness is a commentary on their cruelty being hidden in their interior, because all the flavor text in reference to them is about how cool they were. I don't think these design choices were done purposefully as a contrast for the character and their actions. I think it's because they were designed first and foremost to be cool. And ultimately, even Messmer's monstrousness mostly serves as a way to injure him. His body is pierced by writhing serpents, his body is ruined by his curse, not the bloodshed he caused. His true form of a grotesque giant snake is a great shame for him, a plague since his birth that has more or less ruined his life. It's not the result of his hatred, if anything, it seems more to symbolize the way his devotion to Marika has destroyed him. Dark Souls 3's Aldrich is a gross, rotten worm made out of corpses, wearing the skin of a god as a near-literal paper-thin veneer for the player to understand the depravity of the man, even if they haven't read all the Aldrich lore. For Rolana and Gaius, though, they're just like voiceless knights with lasers, and Messmer approaches dangerous levels of poor scrimblowness. Again, I want to reiterate that these are things in isolation that maybe would bother me less if I enjoyed everything surrounding it more. Base game Elden Ring also has a nebulous timeline that can make understanding the definitive order of events difficult. It also has loads of copy-pasted bosses that might have some lore implication, or the devs might just be banking on you thinking that. I will not forget Godfroy and will not forgive FromSoft for him. What order were the Carrion siblings born in? I don't fucking know. But the difference to me is that I felt like someone knew the timeline and it was just information lost to time in universe. Or I felt like the vagueness was less important than anything else. Or that it was intentional. And that design-wise, overall, I didn't feel like the gameplay and the story were telling me two different things. The penultimate fight with Godfrey is an excellent example of this. The first phase is a mostly normal, if kinda intense duel with Godfrey where he swings around a big axe but wouldn't really be memorable otherwise. This is Godfrey, the noble Elden Lord of America. Then, halfway through the fight, Godfrey rips off his shirt, kills Siraj, and starts doing wrestler moves because he is first and foremost a warrior. He is compelled by bloodlust and he loves fighting. During her wars for the Erdtree, Marika needed that violence to decimate her opponents. When every foe was quashed, however, Marika didn't need a violent lunatic and thusly reshaped Godfrey into a noble, kingly figure, a veil of honor to hide the bloodstains. And even then, Marika had other needs for him, so she banished him and the other Tarnished to go die in a hole somewhere, also so that they'd be in her back pocket for later. Godfrey is moved around like a pawn on the board, and he seems pretty content with this since it means he'll get to do so much violence. And then he dies. He is as bloody and violent as his descendant Godric, with just maybe a bit more decency to do it with his own two hands and not like 30 other people's. With all that said though, I would offer that Godfrey's whole deal, like much of the base game story, isn't necessarily laid out in clear detail. Who or what is Siraj? I don't know, and this criticism could be leveled at the base game at large. Now, it can be understood that the game is intended for several playthroughs, but the fact that major plot elements like Marika and Radagon being the same person, or Ronnie being the one that stole a fragment of death and started the Shattering, are both things that come to mind immediately as things players could reasonably miss. Other things are perplexing or feel straight up like plot discrepancies. Radagon's attack on Landel somehow leaves no trace of evidence, as the battles are absent of anything hinting at the Redmane's presence. You'd be forgiven for forgetting about it entirely, seeing as it only directly shows up in the opening cutscene and there's no other references made to it. For how long was Marika planning on destroying the world she built? Because it seems like it was at least just since before Godfrey got banished. Like, ma'am, you just finished, what are you doing? Ronnie nor Blythe comment on Rykard or Radagon's death in any meaningful way, despite them being siblings. Like, you'd think there'd be something said about the relationship, like, sorry, or get fucked. Melania just kinda throws hands with the Tarnished just cause. The Misbegotten with Radagon's sword. What the hell is the deal between Pedia and Solivus? I'm sure if I thought about this more, I could come up with more vague plot elements or plot discrepancies. But the thing with these is that outside of a few of the most egregious artifacts of last-minute rewrites and cut content, the game has a cohesive theming around power, interpersonal and otherwise, with its bosses. Radahn is turned into a mindless zombie after a dumb fight with his half-sister. Said half-sister has to get dragged all the way home, where her own fearsome strength is rendered utterly inert because she's listless without a brother. Rykard fuses himself with a gross undead god-eating snake. Whatever his ambitions once were have been entirely replaced with insane megalomania. Godric literally sticks more arms onto himself to use more axes. Miquella gets stuck in a cocoon forever. What does the DLC have? A bunch of cool guys and some guys who suck, but it's their mom's fault. The DLC offers a weaker story that is also stupid about its own lore and events, and actively subtracts from the base game with its rewriting of events and the motivation of them. So why then do I keep seeing loads of people say things to the effect of, I didn't like the gameplay, but the lore was great, or the whole DLC was amazing, gameplay, story, etc. And I'm sitting here like, besties, we have retconned huge sections of the base game for an inferior story. And it occurred to me, after thinking about it for a while, that people, I think, believe the story is good because it's much more direct. The NPCs are easier to locate and follow for the most part, because they appear at key locations, they leave notes for you, and they have lots of dialogue. Their questlines are directly responsive to the player's actions and also interact with one another. The characters themselves are also much more direct. Ansbach tells you he's old and he's doing his best to make up for his failures. Moore just wants to help and doesn't want to be sad. Freya tells you that she loves fighting, and Radahn loves fighting, so you're gonna fight. Leda doesn't tell you immediately that she's a fanatic, but you learn it pretty damn quick because she asks you who to purge from the party, and even if she inevitably chooses Hornsent first, she also tells you why. The motivations of the other major players are also pretty clear for the most part. It's not left for the player to speculate why Marika did the things she did. You find out with the Jar Whores and the Shaman Village. Messmer hates you because you're graceless tarnished and he's sad about his mom. Rolana loves Messmer. Gaius and the Fire Knights are loyal to Messmer. The base game by comparison is more obscured. Marika's motivations for her actions throughout the story are left in a trail of breadcrumbs, but there's never a moment where you discover the loaf of bread. You can find a site of grace at a young Erdtree sapling declaring she wishes to interrogate the Golden Order Keeper, indicating it was likely not so distant in the past, and something she might not have had to make a decree about if she did not feel like the Order had gotten out of her control. Or it could have merely been Marika beginning to turn towards shattering the Elden Ring. Maybe having to throw Morgott and Mohg in a sewer made her question her faith. Maybe Godwin's death really did make her say to hell with it all. Maybe the bounty she'd sown in the Erdtree began to fade and she saw a need for renewal. Again, all of these are things that a player would have to muse about to speculate, if they wanted to understand Marika. Whereas in the DLC, we are constantly reminded that Miquella feels guilty for the crimes of the Erdtree and thus wishes to establish the Kindness Brigade. The DLC is telling you its complexity very bluntly. If you think too much about the story, or rather the base game story in contrast, you would be like, hey wait, but that would require you to have engaged with the base game story, and that material was much less available. Miquella's entire deal in the base game has very little direct dialogue relating to it. Gowry mentions him once, Gideon makes an offhand comment a couple of times, and Melania talks about him in her optional super boss fight. Everything else about him is stuff you'd have to pick up by reading or taking note of item placement or level design elements that may or may not be significant. Like, are we to surmise Miquella or his followers' presence by every Miquellan lily, or the same with St. Trina's lilies? You might reasonably miss St. Trina's connection to Miquella altogether. So, I get it to an extent. But there are also times at which I feel like people have gotten some kind of lore-brained poisoning, where if the keys are jingled loudly enough and are subversive and unexpected, then it must be good, right? I don't know how else to explain this response otherwise, frankly. I just keep thinking back to Ranni's entire questline, everything it tells you. Ranni destroys her Empyrean flesh so she cannot become a god. And doesn't the DLC make a big deal about Miquella abandoning his flesh and becoming a god? A thing that shouldn't be possible given what we know from the base game. Ranni is attacked by assassins of the Two Fingers in retaliation, and she isolates herself from her emotions so as to stay strong in the face of so much hardship. And she warns her followers of what may be in store for them for serving her at her side. And yes, Ranni is flawed. Her actions led to Godwin getting half murdered. Whether she knew this would be the result or not, it's clear from Ranni's characterization that she probably would have done so regardless. She resigns herself to endless loneliness as recompense, journeying to the night sky because she knows that godhood is itself the problem for the lands between. But the player can choose to stay by her side, and Ranni is all the more hopeful for it. Her icy attitude is a mask for a kind heart underneath, and Ranni really does wish to do good, but she is constrained in many ways by the unfair world around her that demands she become a vessel for divinity whether she wants it or not. But all of this gets undermined and her despair rendered inert if we take Miquella's plans at face value, which we have no reason not to because he succeeded. None of that matters if Miquella doesn't need his Empyrean body for godhood, if he can just walk through a big door for it instead, if he doesn't have his Two Fingers trying to sabotage his attempt at subversion or an outer god to be a vessel for. The exact mechanics of godhood are directly laid out for the player, more or less, and here's the DLC to completely undo the stakes of Ranni's story. There is also the inherent contradictory nature of Miquella's motivations for godhood as opposed to Ranni's fight against it. Miquella's Great Rune says he is trying to renounce his fate, his strength, his lineage, but his fate as an Empyrean was godhood. He says that in a memory. But if godhood is something he is choosing to pursue, ridding himself of his body so he can enter the Tower of Shadow for the Divine Gate, then that indicates ambition, and his actions against Mohg, for example, become much crueler for that. It trying to be both is contradictory in a way I personally find uncompelling. And honestly, the ultimate kick in the dick is that we are told over and over that his body and blood are left behind and strewn about the Land of Shadow, and then we can leave at any time to go stare at it in Mogwyn. It's just plainly bad writing. It solely serves to fuel my theory that the entire DLC is a fever dream cooked up by Marika to make us feel bad for her. To be clear, I don't think you're dumb if you thought the story was good, or at least emotionally compelling in spite of its flaws, despite my intense hatred for it. I think that the DLC is more successful about getting you attached to certain NPCs and having you understand its plot. But that's the problem. It's so wrapped up in the story it's trying to tell that without a lot of tweaks, you could sever its story from the base games entirely. You might also think that there are bigger fish to fry and that the gameplay issues with the DLC were very significant, and the story wasn't high on your list of priorities critique-wise, which is fair. But the thing is that I think these things are related and not separate spheres. And that leads me to Consort Radahn. Fucking Consort Radahn. Other people have explained in great details the issues with his boss fight, but one I would like to add is that the design is incongruous to the story the DLC is telling. Throughout the DLC, you are given two pieces of information that insist upon themselves. One, that Miquella truly does desire a better, kinder world, but two, he is also manipulative. We see this with Miquella's #1 fangirl, Leda. Leda is a murderous religious zealot that killed all the other Needle Knights due to her paranoia. Miquella's solution to this was to place a charm upon her to get her to chill out a bit. Leda isn't capital E evil though. Her bloodshed does weigh upon her, so this charm also had the dual effect of being his attempt to soothe her. But Miquella is still enforcing his will over her without necessarily addressing the whole wanton violence thing. But we can see this as his empathy to her, seeing her pain, how it related to the violence she inflicted, and trying to find a way to help her. But his way of helping her also removed her agency. It also did not result in any consequences for the murders as far as we know. We are both shown and told how Miquella's charm can completely rewrite people's desires to align with his own, and how he uses this to achieve his goals. Ansbach tries to save Mohg and is immediately disarmed by Miquella's ability to destroy anyone's resolve. I see people say Shrive just means free from guilt, e.g. that Mohg, for example, already desired power and Miquella just turned that dial up to 11, such that Mohg wouldn't care about the abhorrence of kidnapping Miquella for it, or otherwise wove Miquella into his existing plans. Except before the charm breaks on the Miquella Kindness crew, Ansbach's suspicions and doubts are turned into something more like a desire to be of use to Miquella even though he's old. Firstly, that undermines the argument that Miquella doesn't rewrite people's wills, because Ansbach previously wanted to kill Miquella or at least fight him off, and now he wants to help, and his inner doubts are just leashed below the surface. It just shows that Miquella goes about it in a less overtly brainwashy way than a Saturday morning cartoon villain. Secondly, so that still means that Miquella influenced Mohg into being super omega evil as opposed to just evil enough to start a blood cult that sets people's blood on fire? Or, at the very least, that Miquella doesn't stop Mohg from having his followers torture and abduct people for blood geysers. Also, why not just manipulate Mohg into seeing you, the Tarnished, as a threat and getting killed that way? It probably wouldn't be that hard too, seeing as the Tarnished already has kill all demigods on their checklist. This critique is less of a, ooh, Miquella is even more evil for this, ooh, and more of a, the writers did not think about this at all, did they? And all of this, the manipulation of Mohg to get him murdered, is to service Miquella's plans. It's not that Miquella went to the Land of Shadow and saw that shit was fucked, he specifically chose Mohg as a means to get there. I believe the implication is that Miquella saw orchestrating Mohg's death as necessary, a ends justify the means-esque situation. But it's never explained exactly why Miquella needs Mohg specifically. I believe we're to surmise that it has something to do with the Omen Hornsent connection, but why wouldn't literally any other Omen work? The only theory I've seen is that Miquella was attempting to make the Hornsent's god the Horned Lion, but why not use Morgott instead? Is it because we see Morgott's corpse in the base game? Or is it something about Mohg specifically? Well, why does Mohg have more of a shadow connection than any other omen? Is it because of the Formless Mother? Who knows? It's never stated outright. Even the theory regarding Miquella making the Hornsent's god is left entirely unstated and feels almost conspiracy adjacent given how much you have to hunt for the evidence. The entire thing with Mohg is a highly crucial plot point to Miquella's characterization. That despite wishing to do good, he's already willing to turn Mohg into a monster to get him killed, because he needs to open a door and get a dead body for Radahn. This isn't really some small side thing that's easy to overlook, because whether or not Miquella needed Mohg specifically to get to the Realm of Shadow is kind of fucking important. And this becomes even more frustrating as a plot point, because Mohg's body is not what transports us to the Land of Shadow. Miquella's arm is. The body in the cocoon. The one Mohg already force-fed his blood to. You know, the cursed enthralling blood that supposedly has this connection as per Ansbach's dialogue. This potentially could have existed as a subtle element that further twists the knife. That Miquella already had his path to the Land of Shadow, I guess, and got Mohg killed just to use him to bring back Radahn. But it should focus on that more if that's the case. Frankly, I don't think it was intentional. It feels like this entire plot element serves solely as a gotcha or a twist to reframe Mohg as more sympathetic and a whole ooh-woo aren't we all victims thing, after an entire game of having him be an outright villain whose character made sense for the world he was born into. It made sense for someone thrown into a sewer as a baby to create a cult devoted to them and their ego. It does not make any fucking sense to be a totally reasonable guy who also sets people's blood on fire. It feels written in such a way that it's almost a direct slap in the face to anyone who had even been moderately paying attention to the story being told. It feels like it was added solely to add yet more spectacle to the gay incestuous kidnapping that was already criticism-worthy in a base game deprived of any other gay relationship. And no, Ronnie's player's sexual orientation does not count. In a world that regularly disrespects male victims of sexual abuse and incest survivors, now to stunning revelation, Miquella was not the victim, but the perpetrator. Miquella got his half-brother obsessed with him specifically to get Mohg killed, to use Mohg's body as a vessel to bring back his other half-brother. I am further annoyed by people being purposefully obtuse with the, well, consort doesn't have to be romantic stuff. Like, be so for real. Mohg tenderly draws Miquella's hand to his forehead. Mohg gave Miquella a fucking wedding ring. Miquella wraps his arms around Radahn's neck in a loving embrace, and sentimentally holds Radahn's face as they both die. Miquella is able to turn Tillier, a guy so obsessed with St. Trina he tries to kill you if you tell him that she talked to you instead of him, to being on board with Miquella's plans after yeeting St. Trina out like bad leftovers. These elements of manipulation and mind alteration alone should serve to make Radahn's revival more grotesque in some capacity. Some kind of blood Sephiroth or a Frankenstein situation. Something to match the story being told, if nothing else to speak to how Mohg, already downtrodden as an omen, is now being used again solely for his dead body. Miquella literally commodifying and putting down an oppressed person in a flawed attempt to apparently somehow create a kinder world with himself as god on the dead bodies of people already persecuted. But no, consort fucking Radahn is just cool. And it's not as though Ansbach, the primary relayer of most of this information, is ever framed as being dishonest. If we are meant to ever suspect that Ansbach is misguided or not telling the whole truth, then the writing has catastrophically failed to demonstrate that, because overwhelmingly the fandom has regarded Ansbach as good and trustworthy. Miquella's ethereal of kind of vacant beauty contrasts nothing. He's not portrayed as monstrous in any way visually, except maybe in how monstrously boring his design is. Radahn is now a Godfrey knockoff, a marketable collectible version of himself. And the fight sucks, both mechanically and gameplay as a function of storytelling if you couldn't see that through the 1,000 blinding AoEs. Any player that went through the Shunning Grounds and fought Mohg might have made the clever connection to Mohg's shackle and the power it had over him, and been disappointed when it had zero effect on the consort Radahn fight. It's just Radahn again, but cooler. He's hot and young and does Goku moves now. There's no horror, only spectacle. Elden Ring, to me, seemed to correctly place responsibility reasonably onto its antagonist's shoulders. While Marika is responsible for many things, her children are the ones who did all that. Ranni's entire thing undermines any notion that the other demigods were intrinsically evil or forced to be that way. The base game's keystone fight between Radahn and Malenia was an encapsulation of Elden Ring's themes about war and power. In the base game, we're not really given a clear, concrete reason for why Malenia and Radahn fought exactly, beyond that Malenia is the one that came to Caelid. To me, that vagueness felt intentional. It could have had something to do with Radahn stopping the stars, pausing the fate of those in the lands between, potentially an obstacle for two Empyreans. It could have simply grabbed power by seizing Radahn's Great Rune. It could be because Radahn, a man who venerated Godfrey and war, presented a potential threat to the order Miquella and Malenia were trying to build. Pre-Rot Radahn was described as the strongest of the demigods. The fact he went toe-to-toe with an Empyrean is testament to this. His strength alone would be a threat, but we also know Radahn's not just fine chilling in Caelid given how he attacked Landel. The reasons he attacked Landel are not entirely clear, but none of the available explanations necessarily indicate someone who's on board for the kindness world. If it was to help Rykard, which very well could have been, Rykard's not exactly a great guy, and his war was described as one if not the worst in the Shattering. If it was just for conquering or power's sake, then Radahn's just a warlord, anything about him being nice to his horse aside. Regardless of any of that, though, whatever they were fighting for, they both lost. Radahn's immense strength and loyal soldiers all become moot as the Scarlet Rot eats away at him, body and mind, and Caelid is ravaged and mutated. Despite this, however, his men carry on in his absence, attempting to repel the Scarlet Rot with fire and to ensure Radahn's death is a good one. They also hang and burn corpses in effigy and potentially also plague victims. And the actual effectiveness of their attempts to stop the rot are questionable. It paints the picture of a potentially complicated man, undone by the very thing he loved most in war. The fantasy of a good, honorable war paired with the reality of mounds of dead bodies. The irony of how Radahn ends up having to be put down like Ol Yeller while desiring an honorable death. Meanwhile, Malenia without Miquella is listless and unable to lead the Erdtree to fulfill his vision for a better world. She and her soldiers sit and wait and hope he'll come back. Their devotion was to Miquella and not enough to his ideals, and that is their undoing. Malenia gave up her pride and sense of self in an attempt to win a battle that was, originally, ultimately meaningless. It is likely why, with Miquella's disappearance, she seemingly just gives up. She already gave up her pride as a warrior to win a fight, and her brother was the only thing she had left, and now he's gone too. That is why the Erdtree rots. She was one half of a whole, and Miquella, for his part, is likewise unable to free himself, because he's too weak without a sister to save or protect himself from Mohg. These elements all come together to speak to Radahn and Malenia as people as well as leaders. Their story is a poignant encapsulation of the Shattering as a pointless, terrible war fed by the demigods' unfettered power and ambition. We don't know why they fought, because it wasn't important enough. And the DLC throws all this out the window. There's a cut line from the DLC where Radahn would proclaim for the player that he is Rennala and Radagon's son, and that he loves war. While it didn't make it into the game, it's that just thuddingly, insultingly direct in how the developers thought of Radahn. Radahn is totally on board for Miquella's war for compassion because it means he'll get to do so much fighting, even after dying badly the last time he did that. Another blatantly ironic moment in Miquella's story full of them, raising his war-loving half-brother back from the dead because together they will, even literally as children of America, make a new, better world, not the tarnish unconnected to her. It's a wild indictment of the writing, frankly, and its removal is potentially telling in that the DLC seemed unsure if it wants to write Radahn as complicit in the whole rot bombing of Caelid thing, but either got cold feet or increasingly realized how fucking stupid that was for the game they'd actually written. Radahn is no longer a potentially complicated figure, he's just a cool guy who dies badly. Twice. He's robbed of all things that made him interesting in the base game. Even just the contrast of a giant hulking monster of a man riding a tiny frail horse, and the possibility of more nuance to his character is entirely neutered. We never hear once about Radahn's wishes from the man himself, instead being told by everyone but him what he would want, and what he would want was apparently to be brought back from the dead as an action figure. The failure of Consort Radahn as a fight is also representative of the failure of Miquella as a character in the DLC. I've touched on it at several points, but to state it outright, Miquella cannot be both misguided and naive and also a manipulative monster, inflicting so much suffering onto others, unless he is also a massive idiot, which I don't think is what FromSoft wanted me to take away from the DLC. But it's hard not to when the irony is laid on so thick you could use it for a fucking panini press. If I am trying to steelman this DLC though, let's try looking purely at his actions in it. Miquella has correctly determined that the Golden Order is flawed, though in the DLC he has decided it was irrevocably flawed and not in the same way as his base game self had with the unalloyed gold thing, where he thought he could fix it with a hammer. Or rather a needle. Whatever though, he gets to the Land of Shadow and is like, this is terrible. He thusly seeks to cleanse himself of his bloodline sins by getting rid of all the things that gave him power. His great rune, his charm ability, but not really. His body, all in an effort to remove his ability to harm others. He just uses Radahn as a medium for it instead. Something that feels like it should be a biting indictment, and yet it fumbles it so badly by having it just be Radahn again, but cooler, instead of a meat monster. But anyway, the game makes it clear that Miquella genuinely seems to believe these actions, inflicting this much suffering upon himself, are what's necessary to create a good god. It also makes it clear that he felt guilty for at least some of his actions as he abandoned love and doubt around the same time. Miquella wants to be an impartial judge, uncomplicated by personal feelings, despite or maybe because of his former attachments. This is all layered thickly with tragic irony given the parallels the DLC makes between Miquella and Marika. Miquella is framed as tragically misguided in seeking godhood, as we come to understand how Marika too once wished to build a kinder world than the one she was born into, but the power of godhood corrupts inherently, and that Marika could not see beyond the violence she and her people suffered. Likewise, Miquella and his project is doomed because how can a new age be guided by compassion if Miquella has severed love from himself? If he could not even save his other self, his love, how can he save anyone else? These concepts in theory are interesting, heart-wrenching, tragic, but Miquella is not a victim of the world Marika built. Marika's people were falsely imprisoned and tortured under the Hornsent's belief in their superiority via their proximity to the Crucible. Miquella suffers no such fate, and his only proximity to anything similar, the Erdtree's former promise of salvation of the lands between downtrodden, is something that he abandoned. You could make the argument that he did so to achieve godhood, again more ends justifying the means thing. But he didn't tell any of them this. It's not like he went, okay guys, phase 1 of the plan is complete. Keep my sister and yourselves safe while I wait to get sent to the Land of Shadow. Why don't I just ask my remaining soldiers to kill Moog? Don't think about it. Okay, bye. Jokes aside, Miquella's curse of frailty was not something that Marika placed onto him either. And even so, it's also now rendered inconsequential because his charm ability instantly melts the resolve of all those who oppose him. No longer is Miquella defined by his frailty in a world obsessed with strength and violence, because he just has a magic, I'm just a little guy attack that stops anyone from hurting him. And he gets rid of his body anyways. Though even while incorporeal, he is still capable of great displays of power. It's not solely Radahn putting the laser light show on at the end. Miquella cuts a wide, bloody swath across the lands between. He abandons his sister, all their followers who believed in their promise of salvation, has 2 of his half-brothers killed to advance his goals, and gets countless lives ruined during the Shattering, and then goes on to ruin some more in the Shadow Realm by causing so much anguish for his followers. But the game does not commit to this apparent hypocrisy on its face, because it almost painfully insists on Miquella's tragedy. Saint Trina, the other half that was love, that he threw down a giant hole and left to suffer, begs you to mercy kill Miquella with her final breaths, as godhood would create terrible suffering for Miquella. In the final battle of Shadow of the Erdtree, Miquella is not revealed to be monstrous in any particular way. There is no visual language to belie his innocent, newly defined visage, except maybe the fact he is wrapped around Radahn's neck. But even this embrace is not tightly cloying or painful. The end of the battle is not even especially triumphant. Radahn falls dead, again, and Miquella tenderly embraces him as they both fade away. You are left in an ashen arena, surrounded by ancient corpses, with only a memory of Miquella's from back before he apparently went nuts, where he wished for a kinder world. Now, in the DLC, nothing about the Shattering mattered. None of the story was interesting or compelling because actually it was Miquella's fault, and it's not even really his fault because he was just doing his best uwu with the fucked up world uwu. Just ignore the almost comical levels of evil and stupid he committed, and why wouldn't you if the visuals indicate nothing otherwise? There isn't a moment like Godfrey ripping off the kingly countenance to start tearing you apart with his bare hands. There is just a rehashing of the coolest moment in the base game Radahn fight with an annoying score. There is no moment where Miquella turns his Radahn Moog turducken into meat paste for one last grasp at power a la Smo from Dark Souls. There is indeed an irony in Miquella's laser beams, of course. You know, embrace my kindness, blah! But there's no horror to it. There's no moment where the game finally commits to Miquella's evils being confronted. Just, don't you feel so bad for him? Over and over again while Miquella leaves a bloody trail behind him just like his mother while walking in her footsteps. But he's just so cunning and smart, guys. Miquella the steps-on rakes. I just think about a story in which Miquella brings back his war-loving half-brother, but now without his charm ability he just gets Radahn. Radahn, warlord, corrupted by ambition and probably pissed off at getting turned into little more than a dog. Looking down at Miquella with seething contempt and just pushing past him like nothing to fight the Tarnished to realize his ambitions. To put himself on the throne or go be Godfrey's lion like he actually wanted before Miquella clouded his mind. Before he had bitterness and violence corrode anything good about him, something that Miquella missed with his childish fantasies. And Miquella, now incorporeal, is powerless to stop him. His naivety and cruelty have come back full force to haunt him, and there is nothing he can do about it. It's then that Miquella has a moment of clarity, where he helps the player beat Radahn, even if it means he'll die or lose godhood, or now has to ask to be the Tarnished's consort, and they can say no. Or I think about Miquella standing beside some horrific meat monster combination of Moog and Radahn, some awful beast weeping blood and pus that's confused and in pain and kinda hates everything and itself, not unlike the jar innards, and Miquella is just willfully blind to its suffering and just presents it as the Hornsent's god. Some awful parody of the sacred that falls apart as it fights you, leaving Miquella clutching its remains as the horror of all he's done finally dawns upon him, and he's nothing to show for it but a pile of his brother's viscera. I think about a story where it's Moog's actions against Miquella that result in Miquella's mental break. His decision to pursue godhood by any means necessary after being totally powerless, where he decides his compassion must be enforced since the people of the lands between are too corrupted. I think about all the ways the story could have accomplished its own supposed goals better, and in many ways already had in the base game, and just wondered what the hell happened. I think about if it had been better if Miquella had just stayed in that stupid cocoon. Ultimately though, all these what-ifs don't amount to anything. Instead, we are circling the drain of tragedy I thought we left behind in Dark Souls 3, when it was starting to get really myopic and navel-gazing. But I guess not. Fuck you, Miquella didn't care about his sister, and his idea of doing good was even dumber than building a new Erdtree next to the old one. Fuck you, Moog was actually a victim. Marika was a victim, not just by her contemporary circumstances, but also cosmically by fate. Go back to the base game now, where all these terrible evils amount to fuck all. Fuck you for paying attention. We're just here to mash the roll button between 5-minute long combos and new AoEs bigger and more confusing than the last. Get good. Or maybe this is where my secret good 4th Sherlock episode of A Theory will write again, and it'll be revealed in Elden Ring 2 that Shadow of the Erdtree was a lie. One can only hope. In my last essay on the topic, I tried to end on a hopeful note about how learning from things that disappoint you can make you a better writer. I still believe that. I think knowing why something does and doesn't work narratively is valuable for any creator. If I write something as wildly inconsistent as Shadow of the Erdtree, I give you permission to hit me with hammers. But even all this time later, I worry about what this sort of thing means for Fromsoft storytelling going forward. Shadow of the Erdtree feels like Elden Ring 2, and I mean that pejoratively. You know, I see Night Rain taking itself so damn seriously when it's Fortnite but with the Fromsoft catalog. It's almost painful because it feels like a mockery. As someone who actually did care about Elden Ring's plot, seeing its setting mostly used as an excuse to mash a bunch of dolls together makes me feel crazy. Cool dolls I'll allow, but dolls nonetheless, and dolls who are much less interesting than the setting they came from, while also wearing the carved-off veneer of something I loved, like a bad reboot of a beloved series. I keep tonguing the empty socket of Elden Ring like a rotten tooth that needed to be pulled out, and wondering if I fucked up by caring so much, expecting more from game companies. To want them to maybe be a little less shitty to their gay and trans femme-coded characters. To have good writing. And the worst part is, I know FromSoft can do better. That's part of what sparked this video. I finally got around to playing Sekiro, and it rocketed to first place in my favorite games list because, by God, yes, the game was fun, but also the story was so rich and compelling that it pissed me off about Elden Ring again. I also replayed The Old Hunters and was reminded that FromSoft can write stories about victimization, femininity, systemic violence in a thoughtful way, and just completely dropped the ball. All this time later, I'm still angry. I'm still sad. The fact that the game isn't fun is added injury. I beat the Bloodborne DLC in New Game Plus 3 because I loved Bloodborne and I loved The Old Hunters, and I wanted to keep getting my face smashed in, because I was compelled and I was having fun, even if it didn't sound like it while the orphan was turning me into meat spaghetti. Likewise, I put more than 1,500 hours into Elden Ring's base game. I replayed it more times than I can remember, doing theme builds and PvP and parry-only Melania. There was a point where I could basically ace Elden Ring GeoGuessr no matter what obscure-ass location I was plopped into. I could remember individual item placements from random corpses. In Shadow of the Erdtree, I have neither. I hate fighting the bosses, and I hate the story. I have played through the entire DLC 3 times, 4 counting for this video, and that was with the Convergence mod, which let me have fun with spells and fun outfits. The last vanilla playthrough I did was part of a duo run with a friend, and I couldn't have done it at all without them, because there was no way in hell I'd slog through the DLC a 3rd time. So, I don't know where to go from here. I have this missing tooth where I wanted Shadow of the Erdtree to be. It just sucks. It really does. If I had some additional wisdom, I suppose, from this venture, then here. Please play Sekiro. It's really good. It has a cogent, thoughtful narrative about the nature of violence, and is actually fun to play. It's a brick wall that actually tastes good. Other than that, though, I'm afraid, or maybe grateful, that I have nothing more to say. Thank you to all these people for their footage that I borrowed, because I already spent an inordinate amount of time replaying Elden Ring again and did want to play like 10 other games for 20 seconds of clips. Also thank you to my friends and family for withstanding me continuing to bitch about this game all this time later. I truly do hope that I've got this thing out of my system and I can be normal again. If not, I would like a Radon Festival-style funeral, where we all fight and then a big jar guy eats my remains.